The transport ship docked with Nexus Prime at exactly 0800 hours. Katie Sullivan pressed her face to the small window and watched the massive training station grow larger as they approached. She had seen pictures, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. The station stretched for miles in every direction, its silver hull dotted with docking bays, observation decks, and weapon arrays. "First time seeing a Federation military station?" asked the passenger sitting next to her. He was a Vex, his crystalline, body-catching and reflecting the light from the nearby star. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Katie nodded. "Yes, it's bigger than I expected." The Vex made a sound that might have been laughter. "Wait until you see the inside. I'm Christech-7, by the way, heading to Defense Corps training." Katie Sullivan, same destination. Christech-7's body shifted, colors slightly, which Katie remembered meant curiosity among his species. "Human, from the look of you. Which colony world?" "New Montana." The color shift stopped abruptly. Katie had seen that reaction before when she mentioned her home world. Most people in the Federation knew about the Outer Rim colonies, even if they didn't understand what life was really like there. The docking process took another 20 minutes. Katie used the time to study her fellow passengers. There were dozens, of different species represented, all heading to the same place she was. The Zenthari were easy to spot, tall, blue-skinned, and impossibly muscled. They sat together in one section of the transport, speaking in their harsh language and occasionally laughing at some private joke. The Cathara kept to themselves in perfect formation, their insect-like bodies motionless except for the occasional antenna twitch. Katie had read that they communicated through chemical signals that other species couldn't detect. It made working with them challenging, but not impossible. A few other humans were scattered throughout the transport. Katie recognized the look. Colony kids mostly, with the lean build and careful eyes that came from growing up on worlds that weren't quite tamed yet. None of them were from New Montana, though. She would have known. When the docking was complete, passengers filed off the transport in order of species rank. The Zenthari went first, of course. They were one of the founding members of the Federation and never let anyone forget it. The Vex followed, then the Cathara. Humans came near the end, just before the handful of newer species that most people still considered probationary members. Katie didn't mind waiting. It gave her time to observe the docking bay and the station personnel moving around them. Everything was clean and efficient, but she could see the subtle signs of a military installation. The guards were positioned to cover all approaches. The corridors were wide enough for rapid movement, but had choke points that could be easily defended. The whole place was designed for function, not comfort. Lieutenant Commander Alex Murphy stood waiting for the human contingent as they disembarked. Katie recognized him from his photos, middle-aged, graying at the temples, with the kind of scars that came from real combat rather than training accidents. He had been born on Earth, back when humans were still settling their first colony worlds. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," Murphy said when all 23 human recruits had gathered around him. "You're about to begin 6 months of training that will determine whether you have what it takes to defend civilized space. Some of you won't make it. Some of you shouldn't make it. But those who do will join the finest military organization in the galaxy." He started walking, and the group followed him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Katie noticed how the other species moved through the station. The Zenthari strutted with obvious confidence. The Vex glided silently, their crystalline forms barely making any sound. The Cathara moved in perfect synchronization, like they were all parts of the same organism. Humans walked differently. They looked around constantly, taking in details, mapping escape routes, noting potential threats. It was a habit bred into them by generations of living on worlds that could kill you if you weren't paying attention. "Your quarters are in Section 7, Murphy continued as they walked. "You'll be sharing the area with recruits from other species. This isn't an accident." Part of your training involves learning to work with beings who think differently than you do. Some of them have abilities you don't. Some of them have weaknesses you'll need to compensate for. They passed a group of Zenthari recruits in the corridor. One of them, taller than the rest and wearing what looked like expensive jewelry, glanced at the humans with obvious disdain. His friends laughed at something he whispered, and Katie caught enough of their language to understand it. Hadn't been complimentary. Murphy noticed the exchange but didn't comment. Katie filed the information away for later. The tall Zenthari would be someone to watch. Training begins tomorrow at 600, Murphy said as they reached the living quarters. Get some rest, meet your neighbors, and try not to start any diplomatic incidents before the real work begins. Katie found her assigned room and discovered she was sharing it with another human, a girl named Lisa from the agricultural world of Green Haven. Lisa was friendly and talkative, which suited Katie fine. She had never minded listening to people who liked to talk. As evening fell, Katie explored the common areas of their section. The different species had naturally segregated themselves into groups. The Zenthari dominated the exercise equipment, lifting weights that would have crushed most other beings. The Vex had claimed several tables and were working on technical puzzles that hurt Katie's eyes to look at. The Cathara sat together in absolute silence, occasionally touching antennae in what might have been conversation. A few humans had gathered around a small table, playing cards and sharing stories from their home worlds. Katie listened for a while but didn't join in. Instead, she found a quiet corner where she could watch everything that was happening. The tall Zenthari from earlier entered the common area with several friends. He moved like he owned the place, which maybe he thought he did. When he spoke, other Zenthari listened. When he laughed, they laughed with him. He was clearly someone important among his people. He noticed Katie watching and said something to his friends that made them all turn to look at her. Then he walked over, his blue skin gleaming under the artificial lights. "You're staring, human," he said in accented Federation standard. His voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "Just observing," Katie replied quietly. She didn't stand up or change position, which seemed to surprise him. "I am Zixthor, son of Admiral Kethvor of the Zenthari Defense Fleet. You would do well to show proper respect." Katie looked up at him calmly. "I'm Katie Sullivan. Nice to meet you." The simplicity of her response seemed to confuse him. He had probably expected fear or fawning behavior. When neither came, his expression darkened slightly. "Where are you from, Katie Sullivan?" "New Montana." Again, that pause. That moment of recognition. But unlike Christek 7's curious color shift, Zixthor's reaction was different. His eyes narrowed, and he looked at her more carefully. "Outer Rim," he said finally. "Frontier world." "That's right. I've heard stories about the Outer Rim colonies. Dangerous places. Hard to survive." Katie nodded. "They can be challenging." Zixthor studied her for another moment, then dismissed her with a gesture. "Well, you're safe now. The Federation will take care of you." He walked away without waiting for a response, returning to his friends who immediately clustered around him. Katie could hear them talking in their own language, occasionally glancing in her direction. She didn't mind. She had dealt with bullies before, though usually they had claws and teeth instead of just attitude. Zixthor would be interesting to watch over the coming months. He clearly saw himself as superior to everyone around him, especially humans. That kind of arrogance could be useful if handled correctly. Katie settled back in her chair and continued observing. Tomorrow, the real training would begin. She had come a long way from New Montana to be here, and she intended to make the most of it. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the Federation needed defenders who understood that danger. She understood it better than most. Training began before dawn. Katie woke to the sound of alarms echoing through the corridors of Nexus Prime. She had been awake for several minutes already, listening to the station's night sounds and preparing herself for the day ahead. Lisa groaned and rolled over in her bunk. "Do they have to make it so loud?" Lisa complained. Katie was already pulling on her training uniform. "Could be worse. Back home, the morning alarm was usually something trying to eat the livestock." The training bay was enormous, easily the size of 3 football fields. Different sections were marked out for various exercises. Obstacle courses wound through one area, combat rings occupied another. Banks of computer terminals lined the walls for technical training. The ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into shadows. Recruits from all species gathered in formation. Katie noticed how they naturally separated into groups. Zenthari stood together in perfect military rows. Vex arranged themselves in geometric patterns that probably meant something to their crystalline minds. Kithara formed tight clusters with no wasted space between them. Humans scattered themselves throughout the formation with no particular pattern. To other species, it probably looked disorganized. Katie knew better. Every human had positioned themselves where they could see multiple exit routes and watch for potential threats from any direction. Lieutenant Commander Murphy stood on a raised platform with several other instructors. Katie recognized a few of them from the species profiles she had studied during the journey to Nexus Prime. The Zenthari instructor was built like a mountain and had scars covering his blue skin. The Vex instructor's crystalline body pulsed with soft light. The Kithara instructor looked identical to every other member of her species, which made Katie wonder how anyone told them apart. "Welcome to your first day of real training," Murphy announced. His voice carried easily across the massive space. "For the next 6 months, you will be pushed to your limits and beyond. You will learn to fight, to think, to survive, and most importantly, to work together." He gestured to the various training areas around them. "Today, we begin with basic assessments. We need to know what each of you can do before we can teach you what you need to learn. You'll rotate through different stations throughout the day." The boss. First station was physical fitness. Katie found herself in a group with Zenthari, Vex, and Kithara recruits. The Zenthari instructor, who introduced himself as Sergeant Vorth, looked at the mixed group with obvious skepticism. "We will begin with basic strength exercises," Vorth announced. "Lift the weights until you cannot lift them anymore." The Zenthari recruits stepped forward eagerly. Zixthor was among them, and he made sure everyone could see as he loaded the bar with more weight than Katie thought was possible. His blue muscles bulged as he lifted it easily, pressing it above his head multiple times before setting it down. With a satisfied grunt, the other Zenthari followed, each one trying to match or exceed Zixthor's performance. They were all impressive, their enhanced physiology allowing them to handle weights that would crush most other species. The Vex recruits took their turn next. Their crystalline bodies were lighter than they looked, but they had different advantages. Where the Zenthari relied on raw muscle power, the Vex used precise leverage and perfect form. They couldn't lift as much weight, but they could maintain their performance for much longer periods. The Kithara worked as a team, which seemed to confuse Sergeant Vorth. They divided the weight between multiple individuals, coordinating their movements with perfect synchronization. Katie realized they were probably stronger as a group than any individual member, but the testing wasn't designed for collective effort. When it came time for the humans to perform, Katie stepped forward with the others. She could feel Zixthor watching her, probably expecting her to embarrass herself. She loaded the bar with a moderate amount of weight, less than half of what the Zenthari had used, but respectable for her size. She lifted it smoothly, controlled the descent, and repeated the motion. Her form was perfect, her breathing steady. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, just demonstrating her baseline capabilities. When she finished, Sergeant Vorth made a note on his tablet. "Adequate," he said dismissively. Katie didn't react to the comment, but she noticed Zixthor smirking. He clearly thought the assessment was generous. The next station focused on technical skills. The Vex instructor, who called herself Resonance Prime, had set up a series of complex puzzles that involved manipulating holographic displays and solving mathematical equations. This time, the Vex recruits dominated completely. They're crystalline. Minds processed information differently than organic brains, allowing them to see patterns and solutions that others missed. Christex 7, the Vex Katie had met on the transport, solved his puzzle in under 30 seconds. The Zenthari struggled with the technical challenges. Their military training emphasized direct action over complex problem-solving. Zixthor grew visibly frustrated as his attempts to force solutions failed repeatedly. Katie approached her puzzle methodically. She couldn't match the Vex for pure processing speed, but she could adapt her thinking as she learned more about how the system worked. She finished her puzzle in the middle of the pack, earning another note from Resonance Prime. Functional adaptation demonstrated, the Vex instructor announced. The combat training station was run by the Kithara instructor, who introduced herself. Through a series of clicks and whistles that the translation system rendered as Hive Singer Third Branch. The exercise involved sparring matches using padded weapons and protective gear. The Kithara excelled at coordinated fighting, moving together like they shared a single mind. Individual Kithara were less impressive, but they rarely fought alone. The Zenthari relied on their superior strength and reach to overpower opponents. The Vex used their speed and precise timing to avoid attacks while landing calculated strikes. Katie watched several matches before her turn came. She was paired against a mid-level Zenthari recruit, not Zixthor, but someone almost as large. The Zenthari clearly expected an easy victory against the small human. The match began with the Zenthari charging forward, trying to end the fight quickly with overwhelming force. Katie sidestepped at the last moment, using her opponent's momentum against him. She landed a light tap on his ribs as he stumbled past. The Zenthari turned and attacked again, more carefully this time. Katie deflected his strikes and countered when opportunities presented themselves. She couldn't match his strength, so she didn't try. Instead, she focused on speed, timing, and technique. The match lasted several minutes before the Kethra instructor called it a draw. Katie's opponent looked surprised and somewhat embarrassed. He had expected to dominate the smaller human, but had barely managed to avoid losing. Zixthor had been watching the match closely. When it ended, he approached Katie with several other Zenthari recruits following behind him. "You fight well for your size," he said, making it sound like an insult disguised as a compliment. "Thank you," Katie replied simply. "Of course, size matters in real combat. Technical skill can only take you so far when facing a superior opponent." Katie nodded. "That's true. Technique has to be combined with other advantages." Zixthor seemed pleased that she agreed with him. "Exactly. The strong lead, the weak follow. It is the natural order, is it?" Katie asked. "I always thought the smart ones led and everyone else followed." The comment hung in the air for a moment. Zixthor's expression darkened as he realized she might not have been agreeing with him after all. "Strength and leadership go together," he said firmly. "The Zenthari have proven this throughout history." "I'm sure they have," Katie said. "Different species probably have different approaches to leadership." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Zixthor standing with his friends. Katie could hear them talking in their own language as she moved to the next training station. She had made her point without being directly confrontational, but she suspected Zixthor would remember the conversation. The day continued with more assessments. Navigation exercises, where humans performed surprisingly well due to their adaptability. Survival simulations, where everyone struggled except the humans, who seemed comfortable with the idea that everything was trying to kill them. Team coordination drills, where the mixed species groups had to learn to work together despite their different abilities and communication styles. By the end of the day, Katie had a clear picture of her fellow recruits. The Zenthari were strong and proud, but inflexible. The Vex were brilliant, but fragile. The Kithara were coordinated but dependent on group consensus, and humans were adaptable but underestimated. As the recruits filed out of the training bay, Katie overheard Zixthor talking to his friends about the day's exercises. The humans performed better than expected, one of them said. Better than expected is still mediocre, Zixthor replied. They have no natural advantages. They will be useful as support personnel, but they lack the qualities needed for real leadership. Katie smiled to herself as she headed back to her quarters. Zixthor was making the same mistake that many others had made before him. He was judging humans by the standards of his own species, instead of understanding what made them unique. That mistake would cost him eventually. Katie just hoped she would be there to see it happen. 3 weeks into training, the instructors introduced team-based exercises. The announcement came during the morning briefing, with Lieutenant Commander Murphy explaining the new format to the assembled recruits. Real combat is never about individual performance, Murphy said. You need to learn to work with beings who think differently, fight differently, and solve problems differently than you do. Starting today, you'll be assigned to mixed species teams for capture scenarios. Katie listened as Murphy explained the rules. Teams would navigate through a multi-level training facility designed to simulate urban combat. Each team had specific objectives to complete while facing various obstacles and challenges. The facility could be reconfigured for different scenarios, making memorization useless. Teams will be randomly assigned, Murphy continued. You'll have 30 minutes to plan your approach, then 6 hours to complete your objectives. Teams that succeed move on to harder scenarios. Teams that fail repeat the exercise until they get it right. The random assignment put Katie on a team with 2 Kithara workers named BuzzClick and Hive-7, one Vex called Prism-4, and unfortunately, Zixthor. When the team assignments were announced, Zixthor looked disgusted. This is pointless, he muttered to his Zenthari friends. How can I lead properly with such limited resources? Katie noticed that he automatically assumed he would be the team leader. The other species on their team exchanged glances but said nothing. They had probably already learned that arguing with Zenthari rarely accomplished anything useful. During the planning phase, Zixthor immediately took control. He spread out the facility maps and began drawing lines with his finger, showing where each team member would go. The objective is simple, he announced. We enter here, move through these corridors in formation, eliminate any threats we encounter, and secure the target area. BuzzClick and Hive-7 will take point as scouts. Prism-4 will handle any technical obstacles. The human will stay in the rear and provide support. Katie studied the maps while Zixthor talked. The facility was a maze of interconnected rooms and corridors spread across 5 levels. Their objective was to reach a specific room on the top level and retrieve a data package while avoiding or neutralizing automated defenses. Zixthor's plan was straightforward but inflexible. He wanted to move directly toward the objective using the main corridors, relying on superior firepower to overcome any resistance. It was exactly the kind of approach that Zenthari military doctrine favored. There might be better routes, Katie said quietly, pointing to some of the smaller passages on the maps. These maintenance tunnels could let us bypass the main defense points. Zixthor barely glanced at where she was pointing. Those passages are too narrow for proper formation. Movement. We stay with the primary route. What if the primary route is heavily defended? Prism-4 asked. The Vex's crystalline body flickered with different colors as he spoke. Then we fight through the defenses, Zixthor replied. That is what warriors do. BuzzClick made a series of rapid clicking sounds that the translation system rendered as concern about energy efficiency and tactical flexibility. Hive-7 added their own clicks, suggesting that multiple approach routes might be safer. Zixthor waved off their concerns. You think too much. Simple plans work better in combat because there are fewer things that can go wrong. Katie wanted to point out that simple plans also meant fewer options when things did go wrong. But she could see that Zixthor wasn't interested in discussion. He had made his decision and expected everyone else to follow orders. The exercise began an hour later. Their team entered the facility through the designated entrance and immediately found themselves in a long corridor lined with doors. Zixthor took the lead position, his weapon ready. The two Cathara moved ahead as scouts, their insect-like forms perfect for detecting hidden threats. For the first few minutes, everything went according to plan. They advanced steadily through the corridor, checking each room for obstacles or defensive systems. Prism 4 handled the few electronic locks they encountered, his crystalline fingers interfacing directly with the control systems. Katie brought up the rear, as Zixthor had ordered, but she kept track of everything around them. She noticed that the facility's designers had built multiple exit points into each room. She saw how the lighting systems created blind spots that could hide threats. She observed the ventilation shafts that could provide alternate routes through the building. The first major obstacle appeared when they reached the central stairwell. The stairs were blocked by an energy barrier that pulsed with dangerous electrical fields. A control panel next to the barrier showed a complex technical puzzle that needed to be solved before the barrier would deactivate. Prism 4 moved to the control panel and began working on the puzzle. His Vex brain processed the mathematical relationships quickly, but the solution was more complex than usual. While he worked, the rest of the team waited in the corridor. "How long will this take?" Zixthor demanded impatiently. "The puzzle has multiple layers," Prism 4 replied. "Perhaps 10 more minutes." Zixthor's blue skin darkened with frustration. 10 minutes is too long. We need to find another route." Katie had been studying the area around the stairwell. "There's a maintenance shaft that connects to the next level," she said, pointing to a narrow opening near the ceiling. "It would be faster than waiting for the puzzle." "That shaft is too small for me," Zixthor said dismissively. "Find a route that the whole team can use. The Cathara and I could go through the shaft and disable the barrier from the other side," Katie suggested. "You and Prism 4 could wait here and come up once the path is clear." Zixthor's expression grew darker. "We stay together as a team. That is basic military doctrine." Katie wanted to argue that flexibility was more important than doctrine, but she could see that Zixthor had made up his mind. She stepped back and let him continue searching for alternatives that met his requirements. 15 minutes later, they were still looking for another route. Prism 4 had finished his puzzle and deactivated the barrier, but valuable time had been lost. Other teams were probably already ahead of them. As they climbed the stairs to the next level, Katie noticed that Zixthor was growing more frustrated. His rigid approach was working, but slowly. Every obstacle required extra time because he insisted on solutions that kept the team together and maintained his preferred formation. The second level presented new challenges. The corridors were narrower and filled with automated defense turrets. The turrets weren't dangerous enough to cause real injury, but they fired paintballs that would mark hits for scoring purposes. Zixthor's solution was direct assault. He charged down the corridor, absorbing hits from the turrets, while the rest of the team followed behind him. His Xanthari physiology let him shrug off the paintball impacts that would have staggered smaller beings. The approach worked, but it was noisy and wasteful. Katie could see security cameras tracking their movement. She knew that the facility's computer systems were recording everything for later analysis. Their team was announcing their presence to every defense system in the building. "Maybe we should try a more quiet approach," she suggested, as they regrouped after clearing the turret gallery. "Quiet approaches take too long," Zixthor replied. "We need to move fast and hit hard. But if the defenses know where we are, they can prepare traps for us," Katie pointed out. Zixthor turned to face her directly. "Are you questioning my leadership? Human?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The other team members stopped what they were doing and watched the exchange. Katie could feel the tension building, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "I'm just offering suggestions based on what I'm seeing," she said. Your suggestions show a lack of understanding about military operations, Zixthor replied. Leave the tactical decisions to those who are qualified to make them. Katie nodded and stepped back, but she didn't agree. She could see that Zixthor's approach was creating more problems than it solved. The team was falling behind schedule, making too much noise, and using too much energy on brute force solutions. When they reached the third level, the facility's defenses had clearly adapted to their presence. The corridors were filled with more sophisticated obstacles. Energy barriers appeared and disappeared randomly. Floor panels gave way under too much weight. Holographic projections created false walls and hidden passages. Zixthor's direct approach became less effective with each new challenge. He grew more frustrated as his simple solutions stopped working. His commands became sharper, his patience thinner. Katie watched it all happen and said nothing. She could see better approaches to most of the obstacles they faced, but she had been told to leave tactical decisions to those who were qualified. So she stayed quiet and followed orders. Even when those orders made their mission harder, they were now seriously behind schedule, and Zixthor was beginning to panic. His careful military bearing was cracking under pressure. When they encountered a puzzle that required precise timing and coordination between all team members, he finally lost his temper. "This is impossible," he snarled after their third failed attempt. "These obstacles are designed for technical specialists, not real warriors." "Maybe we could try a different approach," Katie said quietly. The debriefing room was smaller than Katie expected. Lieutenant Commander Murphy sat behind a simple metal desk, reviewing footage from the training exercise on a tablet. Katie stood at attention, waiting for whatever punishment was coming her way. "Sit down, Sullivan," Murphy said without looking up. Katie took the offered chair and waited. Murphy continued watching the footage, occasionally rewinding to see certain moments again. The silence stretched for several minutes before he finally set the tablet aside. "Tell me about New Montana," he said. The question surprised Katie. She had expected to be asked about the incident with Zixthor, not about her home world. "It's an outer rim colony," she said carefully. "Agricultural world mostly. We grow crops and raise livestock." Murphy leaned back in his chair. "That's what the official reports say, but I've read between the lines. New Montana isn't just another farming world, is it?" Katie considered how much to reveal. Most people in the Federation didn't understand what life was really like on the Outer Rim colonies. They saw the reports about successful harvests and growing populations, but they missed the details about survival rates and casualty statistics. "The farming isn't easy," she said finally. "The local ecosystem doesn't like having humans around." "How many people did your settlement lose last year?" Murphy asked directly. Katie met his eyes. 43. Murphy nodded as if he had expected that number. "And how many of those were children?" 12. 12 children killed by local predators, environmental hazards, and weather events, Murphy said. "On a world with a total human population of 8,000. That's a casualty rate that would horrify most Federation species." Katie didn't respond. What could she say? Those were the numbers. People died on New Montana, and everyone who lived there accepted it as the price of survival. "But your people stay," Murphy continued. "Generation after generation, they stay and fight and adapt. Do you know why?" "Because it's home," Katie said simply. "Because you're Deathworlders," Murphy corrected. "Because humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day, and that evolution shaped you into something that other species can't fully understand." He stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the training bays. Katie could see other recruits going through their exercises, working in their careful species-segregated groups. "The Federation has been at peace for almost 200 years, Murphy said. "Most of our member species have forgotten what real conflict looks like. They train for theoretical scenarios and practice procedures that haven't been tested in actual combat. But something's changing out there," he continued. "Ships have been disappearing in the outer systems. Trading posts have gone silent. We're getting reports of attacks that don't match any known Federation enemies. Katie listened carefully. This was information that hadn't been shared with the regular recruits. The Federation Council thinks we might be facing a new threat, Murphy said. Something that doesn't follow our rules of engagement. Something that doesn't care about our diplomatic protocols or our military traditions. He turned back to face Katie. If that's true, we're going to need people who understand survival. People who can adapt when standard procedures fail. People who can fight dirty when fighting clean isn't enough. People like me? Katie said. People like humans, Murphy corrected. Your species has something that the others lost when they achieved civilization. You remember what it's like to be hunted. Katie thought about her conversation with Zixthor earlier in the training. He had talked about strength and leadership as if they were the same thing, but strength without adaptability was just another. Way to die on New Montana. What happened to Zixthor? She asked. He's been reassigned to remedial training, Murphy said. He needs to learn that leadership isn't about dominating your team. It's about using everyone's abilities effectively. Will he learn? Murphy smiled slightly. You'd be surprised how educational it can be to get knocked down by someone you thought was beneath you. Some people learn from that experience. Others just get angry. And if he gets angry, then he'll wash out of the program, Murphy said bluntly. We can't afford officers who think that rank gives them the right to physically intimidate their subordinates. Katie nodded. That made sense from a military perspective, but she wondered how Zixthor's father would react to his son's failure. As if reading her thoughts, Murphy continued. Admiral Kethavor will be arriving next week for the graduation ceremony. It should be interesting to see how he handles his son's performance. What about the other recruits? Katie asked. How are they reacting to what happened? See for yourself, Murphy said, gesturing toward the window. Katie looked out at the training bays and immediately noticed the difference. The rigid species segregation had broken down. Mixed groups were working together on exercises, and humans were being included as equals rather than afterthoughts. Word travels fast on a space station, Murphy explained. By tomorrow, everyone will know that the quiet human girl from the agricultural world put the son of a Zenthari admiral on his back in 3 seconds. Is that good or bad? Katie asked. Depends on your perspective, Murphy said. From a training standpoint, it's excellent. The other species are finally starting to take humans seriously. They're asking questions about human capabilities and wanting to learn from human experience. And from a diplomatic standpoint? More complicated, Murphy admitted. Some of the Zenthari recruits are embarrassed and angry. They see what happened as an insult to their species' honor. But others are curious. They want to understand how someone so much smaller than them could be so effective in combat. Katie watched a mixed team working through a coordination exercise. A human recruit was leading the group, with Zenthari, Vex, and Cathara all following her directions. A week ago, that would have been impossible. What happens now? She asked. Now you finish your training, Murphy said. You learn to work with other species as equals. You help them understand that humans bring something valuable to the Federation military. And after graduation? Murphy picked up his tablet and showed Katie a file marked with security classifications she had never seen before. After graduation, you'll be assigned to a special unit, mixed species teams designed to handle situations that regular Federation forces can't manage. The situations involving whatever's attacking our outer colonies? Among other things, Murphy said. The universe is a dangerous place, Sullivan. The Federation has been lucky for the past 2 centuries, but luck doesn't last forever. Katie looked at the classified file, thinking about everything that had led her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been helping her family manage livestock on New Montana. Now she was apparently being recruited for some kind of elite military unit. Why me? She asked. Because you're a Deathworlder who doesn't act like one, Murphy said. Most humans from the Outer Rim colonies are obviously dangerous. You can see it in how they move, how they watch everything around them, how they position themselves for quick action. You look harmless until the moment you need to be dangerous. And that's useful. That's invaluable, Murphy said. Enemies will underestimate you right up until the moment you put them on the ground. Allies will trust you because you don't seem threatening. It's the perfect combination for the kind of work we have in mind. Katie stood up as Murphy dismissed her. As she reached the door, he called her name. Sullivan? She turned back. Your father would be proud, Murphy said. Katie felt a flutter of surprise. You knew my father? Colonel Ryan Sullivan, Outer Rim Defense Corps, Murphy said. We served together during the Kepler Station incident 15 years ago. He talked about his daughter who could track a ridgecat through a thunderstorm and hit a moving target at 300 meters. He never mentioned serving with Federation forces, Katie said. Because it was classified, Murphy replied. Just like your new assignment will be. Katie left the debriefing room with her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about her situation had just changed. She wasn't just another recruit who had gotten lucky in a training exercise. She was following in her father's footsteps into something much bigger and more dangerous than she had realized. As she walked back to her quarters, Katie passed groups of recruits who stopped their conversations to stare at her. Some looked respectful, others curious, a few hostile. But none of them looked at her the way they had a week ago. They didn't see a harmless human from an agricultural world anymore. They saw a Deathworlder who had reminded everyone what humans were really capable of when pushed. And somewhere in the galaxy, threats were stirring that would soon test whether that capability was enough to protect civilized space from things that had never learned to value civilization. Katie smiled to herself as she thought about the challenges ahead. She had come a long way from New Montana, but in many ways, she was still the same person who had learned to survive in a world that tried to kill her. Now she just had a bigger world to protect. Zixthor spun around to face her, his blue skin flushed with anger. The team had been stuck on the same puzzle for 20 minutes. Katie could see the solution clearly, but every time she tried to move into a better position to help, Zixthor ordered her back. His frustration was growing with each failed attempt, and his commands were becoming sharper and more aggressive. The puzzle required all 5 team members to stand on specific floor panels while simultaneously activating different controls. The 5 timing had to be perfect, and the sequence had to be completed within 30 seconds. Zixthor kept trying to force his way through it using brute strength and military precision, but the puzzle was designed to require flexibility and adaptation. This is designed by weaklings for weaklings, Zixthor muttered after their 7th failed attempt. Sweat was beginning to show on his blue skin despite the cool air in the facility. Katie moved slightly to her left, trying to get a better angle on one of the control panels. The movement was small and careful, but Zixthor noticed immediately. I told you to stay in position, he snapped. I can reach the secondary controls from here, Katie explained patiently. If I move just a little bit more, I can handle both panels and free up Prism 4 to focus on the timing sequence. You will stay where I put you, Zixthor said, his voice rising. I am the team leader, and you will follow my orders. But if I move 3 feet to the left, we can solve this puzzle. In the next attempt, Katie said. She kept her voice calm and reasonable, even though she could feel anger building inside her chest. 3 feet to the left puts you out of formation, Zixthor replied. Military units succeed through discipline and order, not through individual initiative. Katie looked around at her teammates. BuzzClick and Hive 7 were making soft clicking sounds that indicated stress among their species. Prism 4's crystalline body was flickering with rapid color changes that meant confusion and frustration. Everyone could see that the current approach wasn't working, but no one wanted to challenge Zixthor directly. Maybe we could try a different formation, Katie suggested. Just for this one puzzle. Zixthor's blue skin darkened to a deeper shade. Are you questioning my tactical judgment? I'm suggesting that we adapt our approach to the specific challenge we're facing, Katie replied. Adaptation is just another word for giving up on proper procedure, Zixthor said. Real warriors find ways to make standard tactics work instead of abandoning them when things get difficult. Katie felt something cold and dangerous stir in her stomach. She had grown up on a world where adaptation wasn't a choice, it was survival. Creatures that couldn't adapt to changing conditions ended up as food for things that could. Zixthor's rigid thinking would have gotten him killed within a week on New Montana. Sometimes standard tactics aren't the right answer, she said quietly. Standard tactics are standard because they work, Zixthor replied. The Zenthari have been using these approaches for thousands of years. We didn't become the military leaders of the Federation by abandoning proven methods every time we encountered a minor obstacle. Katie was about to respond when she noticed something that made her pause. Other teams were moving past them in the facility. Through the transparent walls, she could see mixed species groups working together smoothly, adapting their approaches to each new challenge. While her team argued about formation and procedure, everyone else was making progress. We're falling. Behind, she pointed out. We're taking the time to do things correctly, Zixthor said. Quality matters more than speed. But the exercise has a time limit, Katie reminded him. If we don't reach the objective area in the next hour, we fail automatically. Zixthor's expression grew even darker. We will not fail. We will complete this puzzle using proper military procedure, and then we will advance to the objective area in good order. Katie watched him set up for another attempt at the puzzle. He positioned each team member exactly where his training told him they should be, regardless of what the puzzle actually required. She could see that this attempt would fail just like all the others. She made a decision. Instead of staying in her assigned position, Katie moved to the left where she could reach both control panels. It was a small movement, barely 3 feet, but it put her in the optimal position to solve the puzzle. Zixthor noticed immediately. Get back in formation, he ordered. I can solve it from here, Katie said, not moving. I gave you an order, Zixthor said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected instant obedience. And I'm trying to help the team succeed, Katie replied. That was when Zixthor lost his temper completely. His military bearing cracked, and all his frustration and anger came pouring out. He strode across the small room and grabbed Katie's arm, his large blue hand wrapping around her wrist like a vice. You will stay where I put you, Deathworlder, he snarled, yanking her away from the control panel with enough force to spin her around. The training bay fell silent. Even the automated systems seemed to pause, as if the facility's computers had detected that something significant was happening. Through the transparent walls, Katie could see other teams stopping their exercises to stare. Katie looked down at Zixthor's hand on her arm. His grip was tight enough to leave bruises through her training suit. She could feel the bones in her wrist grinding together under the pressure. Let go of my arm, she said quietly. Her voice was calm and level, but there was something underneath. It that made Buzz Click and Hive 7 step back instinctively. Prism 4's crystalline body stopped flickering and went completely still. Zixthor, however, was too angry to notice the warning signs. You'll follow orders, or I'll teach you what real discipline looks like, he said, tightening his grip even more. Katie looked up at him with eyes that had gone completely cold. I said, let go of my arm. Instead of releasing her, Zixthor pulled her closer, using his superior size and strength to intimidate her. You need to learn your place, human. The strong lead, the weak follow, and you are definitely weak. That was his mistake. Katie had grown up fighting things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than any Zenthari warrior. She had learned to survive against predators that could tear through metal with their claws and crush bones with their jaws. Zixthor was strong, but he wasn't stronger than a Montana ridge cat or faster than a tunnel spider. And unlike the creatures, from her home world, he wasn't expecting her to fight back. Katie moved, The first strike broke Zixthor's grip on her wrist. The second folded him over as all the air left his lungs. The third put him on the ground, gasping and confused, with Katie's boot resting lightly on his throat. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Katie applied just enough pressure to make her point without causing permanent damage. Zixthor's eyes were wide with shock and something that might have been fear. He tried to speak but could only make small, gasping sounds. "I told you to let go of my arm," Katie said calmly, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Around them, the training facility had gone completely silent. Other teams had stopped their exercises to stare through the transparent walls. Even the automated systems seemed to be waiting to see what would happen next. Katie looked down at Zixthor, who was still trying to process what had just occurred. "Do you understand now?" Zixthor managed a small nod. Katie stepped back and offered him her hand. After a moment of hesitation, he took it and let her help him to his feet. His pride was wounded far more than his body, and he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Maybe we could try that puzzle again," Katie suggested, as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. "I think I know how to make it work." The rest of the team stared at her for a moment, then slowly moved back to their positions. This time, when Katie positioned herself where she could reach both control panels, nobody objected. They solved the puzzle on the first try. Lieutenant Commander Murphy appeared in their room a few minutes later, having watched the entire incident through the facility's monitoring systems. Instead of looking angry, he seemed almost satisfied. "Interesting technique, Sullivan," he said. "Where did you learn to move like that?" "New Montana has good teachers," Katie replied simply. Murphy nodded as if that explained everything. "Exercise is over for your team. Report to debriefing room 7 in 1 hour." As they filed out of the facility, Katie noticed that the other teams were looking at her differently. Word of what had happened was already spreading through the station. By evening, everyone would know that the quiet human girl from New Montana had put the son of a Zenthari admiral on the ground in 3 seconds. Zixthor walked beside her in silence, occasionally touching his throat where her boot had rested. Katie had been careful not to cause real damage, but she had made sure he would remember the lesson. He would never grab anyone's arm again without permission. And throughout the station, military instructors were beginning to reassess their understanding of what humans were really capable of when pushed too far.